we'll get on. Perfect, very efficient. So welcome to an audience with Dominic McGregor on behalf of NatWest, Royal Bank of Scotland and Ulster Bank. Joining myself today are a few colleagues from the bank's enterprise team. We have Paula Ritchie, the Regional Enterprise Director, who will be joining me in interviewing Dominic. And we have Kristen Boland, who will be on hand to take any questions through the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. Please make sure that you use this. We'll be collating questions throughout the session. And once we've done with the formal interview, we will get through as many of these as possible so we can get a lot of Dominic's insights in the short amount of time. Now, before we go into the main event, a reminder of the different methods of enterprise support is now on your screen. Information on all these can be found on the bank's website. Today, I'm keen to highlight our Business Builder proposition. This is essentially a one-stop library of business support resource that you can go through at your own pace to help you grow. It's free to sign up and you do not need to be an existing customer of the bank. So I'd encourage anyone after this to check it out, as there's a whole host of support which can help you to grow your business. Now on to today's guest. I'm going to go through a bit of a bio here. So today I'm delighted to introduce Dominic McGregor. I've had the pleasure of seeing Dominic's journey from afar on LinkedIn since connecting many years ago when we both actually played on the same university team. Although we were saying yesterday, I think Dominic only ever saw me hobbling around on crutches. But several years later, I'm excited to interview Dominic as the co-founder and previous Chief Operating Officer at Social Chain until exiting the business in 2020, just 6 years after forming. For those that don't know, Social Chain are one of the world's largest social-first publishers with over 80 million followers. Through their creative social media agency, they operate on a global scale, making brands matter at the right time and in the right place. Dominic has led Social Chain to work with global brands including Amazon, Coca-Cola, Apple, Spotify, and Just Eat, to name just a small selection, leading their campaigns all the way from conception through to execution. Dominic established the business with his co-founder at the age of just 22, leaving university where he was running various local media pages to pursue Social Chain. A decision that turned out incredibly successful, the business raising investment and turning over 1 million in the first year alone. Within just 6 years, Social Chain had went on to have bases in Manchester, Berlin, London, New York, and Munich. With a team of over 750 members, several acquisitions throughout this time, and becoming a publicly listed company on the Düsseldorf Stock Exchange in 2019. Dominic is also a passionate advocate for young people's mental health. After therapy, in his words, saved his life, Social Chain decided to offer each of their employees a quarterly opt-out therapy session. Understanding the importance of mental health to entrepreneurs, we will discuss this later on in the session. We'll also touch on the growth of social media and its importance to businesses, including any challenges this has brought. A few notable milestones of Social Chain before we get into the interview. So they were formed in 2014. The following year, they were awarded the Drums Social Media Agency of the Year. In 2016, they opened a European headquarter in Germany and a US headquarter in New York. It was in 2018 that the company went on to employ over 300 people across these locations. In 2019, Social Chain merged with German online retailer Lumaland AG to become the Social Chain AG and became publicly listed on the Düsseldorf Stock Exchange. Then 2020 was a big year with turnover of over £178 million. They announced the largest acquisition in history, taking a 51% stake in the Southern Californian digital performance marketing agency. And Dominic exited the business after 6 successful years as co-founder and COO. So welcome, Dominic. Thank you for joining us. That is an incredible track record in such a short space of time.
Thanks, Stuart. And yeah, I think that was the most thorough introduction I've ever had. So I really do appreciate that. So yeah, welcome. I'm really happy to be here. As Stuart said, yeah, I've known him for coming up to 10 years now when we played football together. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this and thank you for joining me this morning.
No, thank you, Dominic, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this with us. So I suppose want to start off with the early years initially, and probably worth hearing your words exactly what Social Chain do, but also how did it all start?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, and I've got to go back to when I was at university. So like most people, I was just a normal student. I would be going out. I'd be out Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, sometimes Thursday and Friday as well. And one evening when I went out and got very drunk, I woke up the next day and went to the toilet and discovered there was no toilet paper there. So instead of doing the logical thing and buying more toilet paper, I actually decided to log into Twitter and tweet about it. So I started tweeting other things about my university life that were going on, and I created this under the brand Student Problems. So you'd see me walking around campus tweeting about how expensive cheese is, tweeting about how I've got to run through the meadows to get to my lecture, and all the kind of other things I experienced at university. And in the first kind of couple of weeks, it got a small bit of traction with about 400, 500 people joining it. But then it kind of grew exponentially. So in the next couple of months, it went from 500 people to 50,000 people.
Wow.
I was sat there at university spending more time on Twitter, running a Twitter account, than I was actually doing any work. And this is where I met my co-founder, Steve. So Steve had run a student business called Wallpark, which is basically Gumtree for students. And we came together because he thought it was possible to post about Wallpark on my social feeds to bring people to it. And we realized that when we pressed go to Wallpark on Student Problems, 400 students straight away would go from Twitter to their website. And for us, that was kind of like the first initial aha moment, because we knew that if we grew more student social media followers, we could then get more people to our website. So it was that point where I made a decision to take a year out of university and drop out, essentially, to try and figure out if there was something here and we could make something successful. So what I continued to do was build big social media pages. So we were able to reach around 2 million students by the end of the next couple of weeks, because I just spent the entire time running social media accounts around being a student. And when we started to speak to brands about what we had in terms of the website and the social media pages, people were not interested in the website. They were like, oh, we want to work with these social media pages because that's where young people are and you can send traffic to our website rather than sending people to a website. Mm-hmm. So that was the moment when we kind of thought, oh, this could be something again. So got rid of the website and focused entirely on building and scaling and acquiring social media assets. And we went around the world finding young people who'd started big social communities in their bedrooms, all of them who were similar ages to us. And we brought everyone together under the umbrella of Social Chain. So the idea was that social media and a chain of pages would come together to produce a business called Social Chain. So that was the early days. And in the early days, we were just kids in our bedrooms running social media accounts for fun.
Brilliant. And how was it choosing to leave university? How did that go down? Was it a big decision at the time, or did you know naturally that you thought that was the right one to make?
Yeah, it's something I've always toyed with. I think in hindsight, I've got a little bit of hindsight bias and think it was probably the right thing to do. At the time, I got a lot of questions from friends and family, but ultimately, I kind of jumped ship with a life raft, I guess, because I took a year out initially. So the option was that if the year didn't work, I could always go back and complete my studies. So it took me probably 2-3 months of realizing that I'd left university and focusing on this full time, that I knew I'd made the right decision. So for me, it was always a risky decision at the time, but without risk, you don't get reward.
No, absolutely. And going into that first year, I believe it went quite well. You managed to get your first investment. I believe it was a £300,000 check. Probably don't get many checks these days, but tell us about how that happened and what the journey was like there.
Yeah, and I think it's the last check I've ever seen. So I don't think since then I've seen another check. So yeah, we were the model evolved. So we were running these social media pages and we were speaking to brands. And what we kind of discovered was not only could we post about people and send them to traffic to their website, but we also had a really understanding of why this was working. And it was this at the time when brands didn't really have social media networks or channels themselves. I remember speaking to a brand which is now a PLC, trying to tell them why they should have an Instagram account. And I mean, imagine doing that now. It would just seem so weird. And that is a business which is built off social media influencers. So we were speaking to businesses about why they should be on social media, how they should navigate it. So we became quite consultative, as well as then activating campaigns. And we were fortunate enough to kind of have a nomadic lifestyle. So we traveled around the world and were able to work with kind of people we were advising remotely. We actually did some work in Silicon Valley. So we spent some time with some businesses out there. And so while we're doing this, living this fantastic life, one of our clients turned to us and said, do you want investment? my father and I would like to invest in you. So we fly back to London to have these discussions to understand what the kind of the remit is. And for us, we weren't looking for investment. We weren't wanting to settle down yet. But we thought that if we were to professionalize what we were doing and actually scale it into a business rather than just being two kids and a couple of other people traveling around the world, we could actually make something here. So Steve and I spent a lot of evenings discussing the pros and cons of taking investment, and we ultimately settled on to do it. And we had our kind of first formal meeting with the guy and his father and one or two other individuals. And his father was a wine merchant, who was, I think he was at the time maybe 78. So he wrote a check, which was much more normal for those than people than for us. So I took that check. I remember I got it in Hammersmith, so I was in Hammersmith Square, and our bank was in Chiswick, NatWest Bank. Little plug there. And I had to walk from Hammersmith to Chiswick, which is about a 15-minute walk, with this check for an amount of money I've never seen before in my life. And I think I'm pretty sure it's like a windy day. It's quite always cold in the UK. So I'm there like walking down Chiswick with it literally to hold into my chest in my coat, looking around, thinking everyone's going to mug me. Getting to the bank and being like, I'd like to deposit this check, please. And for me, as I said on my post on LinkedIn, I felt like literally like Charlie from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory with a golden ticket running down the street. So that was a fantastic moment. And for us, it was the investment which allowed us to kind of professionalize things. With the investment came, one of the guys was actually an accountant, so he had managed to kind of formalize the books and gave us a focus, I guess. Once you take someone's money and take investment, you have in my opinion, you have a duty to return it. So that's what we set about now, was growing and scaling the business and raising value and equity for everyone involved.
No, perfect. And in terms of that investment, then that obviously allowed you to put some plans in place and develop the business. And early on, I believe there was a bit of choice about where you're going to locate the business and so on. So can you tell us a bit about the sort of journey of what you decided to do for Social Chain and where you decided to set up?
Yeah, so part of the investment was we could use our office space for a while. We had 6 desks, and we kind of made a mental note that when we got past those 6 desks, we had to move, and that was like an indicator for us when we were ready to go. Mm-hmm. And it took us a couple of months, 2 months to really get past those 6 desks. And by the time this was happening, Steve and I were actually sleeping in the office because it had sofas. So we'd sleep in the office and we'd get up at 7, we'd go downstairs, get a shower in the communal showers, come back up at 8 o'clock, sit at our desks and hope no one knew. We probably did this from August 2014 when the business was incorporated to that November. We figured out in October that people knew what we were doing because it would come to like evenings and we wouldn't leave. And we'd be wearing similar clothes and we'd have suitcases in the cupboards. So we kind of, Steve and I started looking for, we probably needed somewhere to live now. And we wanted to have space. We wanted to have access to a talent pool. And we just decided that, look, we don't think London's the place for us because we have these ideas of we wanting to build a fantastic creative office. We wanted to work with some up and coming young people. And also, the investment we received was probably definitely a seed fund. So it was much more like, okay, if we want to figure out whether this can work, we need to make every single pound go as far as possible. So that led us to choosing to go to Manchester. And we moved to Manchester after that Christmas. So yeah, 2015. January 2015 when we moved up there.
Perfect. And you mentioned about talent as well, and something that we talk about entrepreneurs, and it's a big part of as they grow is how do they hire, especially when it's their first few hires and they're not used to it. So what did you look for when you started hiring a team around you? Because obviously you've grown the team very considerably. So what were your initial thoughts there?
Yeah, so thankfully we had a really good nucleus of 5 people who were all there pre-investment. So that was Steve, I, Cathal, Hannah, and Michael. So that kind of formed the nucleus of the business. So we had a kind of principle of what we were looking for in people. We wanted someone who to be, relatively hungry, fresh ideas, but also understood the world of social media. So that actually really limited the fish a little bit because it was so new. So we went to Manchester Met. We held an open day for people to come in and meet us. And from that, we hired 3 people. We met about 15, 20 people, but we hired 3 people. 2 of those were still in the business when I left. So what we looked for them was, people who were bought into what we were trying to achieve, and we saw a little bit of potential in them. And the story of Social Chain was always, probably wrongfully, but bravely taking risks and taking bets on people in their future. We had some losses where people didn't work out, but we had some significant wins where, as I said, those two people we interviewed on that day in Manchester Met were still with the business. One of them being the global marketing director, and the other being the art director. So they grew with us. So yeah, we just made sure they were the right social chain type person. We had an idea of what the person should be and how they should be as an individual, and we just believed that we could all learn together.
So really that culture piece came through, that you're looking for people that fit in.
Yeah.
No, excellent. I'm going to pass on to Paula just to discuss a bit about how you grew the business. So Paula.
Morning, Dom. So when you talk about those early days and having that little bit of a nomad lifestyle as you're getting to know the various other influencers that were doing a similar role, did that help to shape the geographies that you decided to grow the business to set up in? Any thought process around your decision making there? And similarly, you've touched just on the culture element and bringing on board similar like-minded people. How did you maintain that culture as you grew that business?
Yeah, great questions. And I think when in the early days when we were kind of mapping out the landscape, we saw the opportunity for someone to come in and do this. There was a little bit of money floating around from some media companies looking at the space, but that was predominantly on YouTube. YouTube was kind of and YouTubers in general were kind of the golden stars at the time. So we wanted to look at how we could recreate that across other social platforms. Twitter was a predominant one we focused on, where you could tweet Stephen Fry in the early days and he'd follow you back. So it was a very close connected platform. So we could, and that was kind of on the up. And with Facebook as well, Facebook had just launched features around pages. So you could now start pages. So what we saw was a lot of promising signs about where the platforms were going. Because at this time, there was a lot of questions around what social media is going to be. Is it going to stay around? Is it going to stick? And so we kind of saw that there was going to be something here, and that we saw it as kind of a place where entertainment is going to happen. So that's why we kind of chose to create humorous comedy pages, but also news-related brands. And to your second point around the culture, I think the only answer I can really give here, which does its justice, is that above everything, and I mean above everything when it comes to a penny a profit, it was the most important thing for us. It was the role as founders and as leaders in the business we emphasized the most. And what I mean by that is it's just the most money thrown in it or the most time put in it, it's the most care. So if we had an individual who'd come to us with a genuine problem, so for example, someone came to us whose mum had actually defrauded her of her monthly salary. And she was obviously in pieces, it's A, a mum, but B, it's financial. So we obviously, in some instances that could be passed to HR, it could be, it could take 2-3 weeks to sort. Our mindset there was we solve that straight away. We go in as founders and we make sure that as soon as we hear that information, something is done about it. And you take that attitude to every single small thing that is a big deal for someone, and you create a culture where people trust you that things are going to get done, but people also know that you're prioritized. And for us, that was the simple recipe, is that we just genuinely cared.
So bringing back that culture to growing and scaling your business, that's paramount, that's the most important area. But how did you, as a founder and leader, how did you relinquish some of the control on the day-to-day aspects to allow you to focus on scaling the business?
Completely, great question. So in the early days, we were sat around the business thinking, okay, what do we need next to scale? We were probably about 10, 15 people, and we were looking at the roles we needed. And this was kind of an open town hall. We had most people from the business there. And I can't remember who it was, and I'll get a message from them afterwards. But someone said, "Oh, could we have? We need someone to make sure everyone's happy." And that was just a real thing that struck a chord with the team. And we're like, "Okay, well, we'll get a head of happiness." So our 15th hire was a head of happiness, and we gave her the remit of making sure that everyone was happy. That was just as broad as it was. I had no idea what that entitled, but that was her responsibility. So she was, we worked really closely with her continuously, to make sure that these things would get solved. She would then get a team of 3 happiness managers, and then they would obviously then work with the team. So we just created a really engaging and open way for people to get to things being done. And people would know if they went to Kira, things would get done. And that was how it scaled. Kira had the authority from Steve and I to make sure that things just got done. no excuses. She never had an excuse. She would just get things done. And she had complete autonomy in that area. So we scaled it by, passing that burden to somebody else and that responsibility to someone else, but also fully empowering her. In some instances, she probably had more control than Steve and I around the people side of things, to do what she knew people needed.
That's a great role, head of happiness. I think I'll take a note on that one. So just adding to that then, if you had, I think you mentioned that was your 15th hire. Mm-hmm. So clearly that's going to take time to acquire all of this talent and to pass that control over. Any skills gaps that you identified quickly? How did you do that as an entrepreneur in a small business versus the time and resource constraints that you knew you had?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And sometimes it felt like when you're flying an airplane, but you're building it at the same time. So it was, at first, we didn't really know what we didn't know. So what I mean by that is we never meant to start an agency business. So when someone told us, you're an agency, we were like, oh, we're an agency, cool. So what the agencies need, and we kind of dusted out the blueprint of what an agency is, account structure, client services, Activate. We're like, okay, we need these people. Before realizing maybe that that structure wasn't going to be right for the kind of work we do. So we always kind of ebbed and flowed around what we actually needed. And we kind of really never had, in the early days, especially a plan of, these are the 6 roles we need, these are the 7 roles we need. We kind of just said like, someone will come to us and be like, oh, influencers are growing. We need probably someone to focus on influencers so the client service and team can focus on clients. So it was very, very reactive. And probably when we got to the end of year 3, we could sit down and think, okay, taking the responsibility from what the clients want and what direction they're trying to take us in, who do we want to be as a business? What do we want to stand for? And it was that moment where we kind of did a bit of a self-analysis of the business and say, okay, we want to be the business which keeps brands at the forefront of what's possible. And that was the kind of thing we wanted to hone in on. So therefore, we could take that principle and then say, okay, what do we need to achieve that? And that's when we kind of had a big pivot from being a business which serviced our clients and their needs and kind of falling hand over foot for what they wanted, to becoming a business where we will set an agenda of what the clients want and we'll tell them what they should do. So it was probably in that point before we were scramblers. We were trying to get bodies on seat to do things. And afterwards it was much more, okay, we know who we want to be. This is where we're going to go.
It's really impressive to hear you talk about being a responsible business, especially in the early days. And you touched on there, by year 3, we decided that we wanted to go in this direction. How did you keep that discipline around key milestones so that you could concentrate on growth?
Yes, and that's a good question. So we always kind of focused on, I guess this is probably one side where we do benefit, is that revenue growth for us was always consistent. We had a really good, new business flow. What we had a real struggle with was retaining business. So we actually then changed our parameters of how we rewarded people based on retaining business rather than winning new business. And that shift for us again was huge because it turned us into from a business which was probably a new business acquirer to being a business which looks after its clients and services. So we had to continuously change our KPIs, and we actually in 1 year we removed revenue as a target for a large cohort of the business so that they could focus purely on servicing clients and growing those clients. And what we actually looked versus the year forecast was that we had a better year than what we've set out at the start of the year. So for us, it was very reactive. And I think we had to understand what was going on in the business and what was causing the problems mainly, so like churn of clients, to be able to address and set the right KPIs for the right people.
Great insight into how you managed those KPIs and adapted them. So now you've mentioned clients a few times, and obviously great introduction from Stuart at the start about some of those global brands that you've worked with. How did you manage those relationships? How did you even start those relationships?
Yeah, and that's those relationships for us were something which, again, in hindsight, and I've had a lot of time recently to declimatize to what Social Chain was and how it was something where I think we got lucky a little bit. I think I'll be honest to say that we got lucky, because we were first movers and we were early on in the days, but B, because there was some really good people who were trying to find and figure out this landscape who found us. So our first 2 clients were Pretty Little Thing and Spotify. So pretty little thing. We're a business who were trying to get into this space more and more. They understood that they were going to be the younger version of Boohoo and that they wanted to aim young. So they came and found us, because we were making a lot of noise about being young people. And then secondly, Spotify wanted to reach students. They wanted to own students. So they spent a lot of time finding student community. So that, again, they came to us. And for us, that was something where I completely appreciate that doesn't happen to every single business, where it might happen to businesses that are kind of in new sectors and playing at the forefront. So off the back of that, we were obviously then able to generate a lot of noise and PR around us. And that was the story we wanted to tell us. We wanted to tell the story of who we were. And we led ourselves to kind of talk the talk and walk the walk a little bit. So we kind of focused on this thing of being able to make anything on Twitter the most talked about thing in less than half an hour. And we led that, and we led that very proudly, and we did that in a number of situations. So firstly, the kind of turning point for the business is when we did that for a BuzzFeed editor. So again, BuzzFeed, we're looking at the space, trying to figure out what it's going to be, whether it's going to be fraud. And one of the editors came to us to kind of do a bit of investigation. And he came in, he didn't really say much. He was a tall guy, London, came to Manchester office and sat down and said, hi. And then he opened the conversation, no word of a lie, said, you guys have claimed you can make anything the most talked about thing on Twitter in less than half an hour. Opened his phone, got his stopwatch out and pressed start. Like literally like that, in that moment. We had no idea what he's coming for, no idea. So we're there in the office, like, he's trying to make us call us liars. So we pull the team and be like, okay, we've got to do this now. We've got to make something the most talked about thing on Twitter. So we did. We managed to, through our communities, through our relationships, to grow something. And thankfully, it was a slow news day. So we made You're British When, the most talked about thing on Twitter. And he wrote the article that we could make anything. That he basically said, I went to go and see these guys where they could actually do it, and they did it. And that opened the floodgates. BuzzFeed was probably the pinnacle of news at the time. It was, everyone was reading it in the marketing world. And from that, we got big clients like Fox, Disney, inquiring. And that ball just, fortunately for us, kept rolling because we had the case studies to talk about the brands we were working with and the story of the business. And we just managed to maintain that momentum. I think that was the most important thing, of continuing to do stunts as well. So we evolved the stunts, but also the work we actually did was doing the talking. And that was the most important thing, was making sure that when we produce something for a client, we'd made Fox's movies #1 in the box office. When we were doing those things, we were doing them well.
It's really interesting to hear about how some of those trigger points with the brands and the clients you're working with helped stimulate your growth.
Mm-hmm.
And many of those, yes, would have been out with your control, but clearly that helped to stimulate some of the questions you had around your KPIs, your customer service and things.
Yep.
So turning to that growth then, Dom, and you're starting to make profit, clearly from the clients that you're working with and the opportunities that you had. How did you manage cash flow? And in particular, the investment side, the investment question as to which parts of the business you should focus on next?
Yeah, and this is where we've learned out that cash flow and profit are very different things, That was a big learning curve for us. And also that big businesses pay on time. Wow. And I guess this is probably one of the things where I sound very privileged a little bit, is that the biggest issue was we were working with big clients, okay? And we were tied to their payment terms. So you can imagine this influx of business when we're operating on a 40 to 50% margin, pretty standard, where Disney got 90 days payment terms. And it's not 90 days, it's 100, 110 maybe. So we have this influx of work where we have to pay out, and we have a really long time to get paid. So this growth is really difficult to maintain because we're trying to manage investments, we're trying to manage normal cash flow, and we're trying to manage campaigns that are going out. And every time, fortunately, a big business comes in, again, the budgets increase and also the costs increase. So we hit a real difficulty with cash collection, but also with just the nature of growing so fast and working with these types of clients, that things, investments we wanted to make probably had to be put on hold. So we actually then quietly spoke about that, and we probably need to go and raise some cash because we have no problem with, we're profitable, we've got no problem with it. We've just got a problem with cash burn and cash collection. So this is when we decided to take the next round. And what we wanted to do is, instead of taking money from high net worths or from people, we wanted to find a strategic investor. So we had some early conversations with some of the big media players, but we actually ended up taking investment from a German individual called Georg Koffler, who again found us, actually emailed us. He started a media company around influencers in Germany, brought it to the UK, and wanted to see if there was a synergy between us. So we took our next round of investment there and essentially earmarked that investment entirely for investment and growth in the business. So that's how we launched our US office and our German office, and we've just basically ring-fenced that from cash flow to grow. So it led us, maybe if we were better at cash collection and managing cash flow, we might have not needed to take investment at that point. But for us, again, the decision we made was to take the smart money and the right money, rather than just take on debt in the business or to take on someone who's just going to put some cash in.
It's always a tough question for scaling businesses, so great to hear your honest insight there. Before we move over to Stuart to talk about successes, just one last question from me. So you talked on some of the global investment stroke acquisitions you were making. What was your primary driver for those acquisitions? Was it the value sets, or was it the clients that they had? Just talk us through a little bit more there, please.
Yeah, so a lot of the reasons we looked at acquisitions in the early days was consolidation of the market. So there was other players popping up now. So this is probably in the media space where Lad Bible, Unilad were coming into fruition, and other money was moving into it through investment. So BuzzFeed were someone who we always earmarked as a competitor, and they had quite a lot of money into it. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to come from a community approach. So we didn't want to have, we wanted to have strong communities in specific areas that we saw were future facing. So we identified areas like gaming and fitness as two areas which are going to grow on social in the next couple of years. So we wanted to consolidate those sectors and have brands in those areas. So we looked at and acquired them. We also acquired an influencer marketing company again, saw the rise of influencer marketing, so wanted to be able to say we can do that authentically. So we then became one of Europe's largest influencer marketing businesses. So it was a combination of a lot of things, but I think at the time we were, social media was seen a land grab. A lot of people trying to move into it. It was becoming hot. People saw that was going to stick around. And from a business point of view, we needed to be always in these conversations, but also, and it's a really powerful word, but momentum is a really powerful word for people in the business, but also people outside the business to feel like they're growing and doing the right thing. So we wanted to, maybe wrongfully maintain a bit of momentum. So we'd probably stick our neck out a bit too far to maintain that story. With some failed acquisitions, to be honest, let's be very transparent. So not everything worked, but that was it. It was very much a period where social media was getting a lot of attention and a lot of consolidation, and big players were moving in. That we wanted to make sure that we were in those conversations constantly.
Perfect. No, and Dominic, I suppose, just a couple of questions around setting yourself up for success and then celebrating the successes. Obviously, set up the business at a young age and talked about a lot of learning curves. So one thing quite keen to understand is, did you have different mentors throughout that journey, a well sort of very diverse board? How did you sort of set yourself up for success in that regards?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, again, looking back in hindsight, it's something which we kind of did by accident. So our first investment, as I said, we took it in from a wine merchant who, built his business. And although he constantly asked us whether we could sell wine online, he wasn't very aware of social media, but what he did know was kind of some principles of how to act in business. So he kind of taught us that, and he was very honourable, great chap. And then secondly, when we took in the investment from the German co, Georg Koffler has done 2 IPOs before in Germany. That's he's renowned. He's on Dragon's Den over there. So he brought in not just himself, but a group of individuals who are entrepreneurial. So we managed to grow from them. So we had a lot of people in the business, but I also thought then, like, you can't tell people in the business about the business sometimes. You don't want to tell your investors some things. So you need to find that route. And Steve and I were very good together in terms of just supporting each other. But also, fortunately, at this point, we started to make a bit of noise, and people around the city were knowing us, around the UK and Manchester. And we just bumped into some interesting individuals who ended up just being our mentors, and friendships kind of thing, where we just say, oh, this has happened, what do you think? So again, I never set out to find a mentor. I never set out to have someone there. But just by nature of meeting interesting people and people who had been there before, we kind of found relationships where we can use them as support.
No, excellent. Using your network and stuff like that, which can be a bit more difficult in current times, but definitely important for businesses to use. And then I suppose everything moved very quick. I mean, we were discussing before that the journey you've had in 6 years is something most entrepreneurs would love to have. How did you take time to celebrate the successes, and was it important for you and the organisation to do that? Because I think, as you said, it was the Drum Network Awards which you won, was your first award in 2015. So how did you make sure that was important to the organisation?
Yeah, God, celebration is such a weird thing to think about. So privately, Steve and I would never celebrate. You know, we would always be laser focused on where we're going, and we would, you know, our end of year conversations with each other would be, oh, well done, we go again. Simple, you know, we go again, and was simply our turn to each other. We literally write that to each other at the end of the Christmas and birthdays, and just keep going. So that was our mindset. But to the team, you know, we had to make sure that we were publicly celebrating these things. And in the early days, you know, this was in the early days that celebration was weekly. You know, we'd win a client and we'd celebrate it. And again, coming back to Paula's question around culture, you know, we started celebrating new wins more than we did retained wins. And again, so, you know, as an individual, you're going to want to have that bottle of champagne when you sign a client versus when you re-sign a client. So again, we heavily celebrated too much in areas. And the awards were always, you know, a moment where we'd send the team up, and it would be for the team, not for us. Steve and I were very, very aware that it was never just us. It never could have been just us. It had to be the team. So everything we did, we put for the team. You know, Christmas parties and award ceremonies. We always made sure that the team had the moments to realise and appreciate what they've done and achieved.
No, that's great. It's great to hear. Clearly, culture is really important for yourself to drive that success. So thank you. Paula, back to yourself, probably around the exit.
Yeah, the burning question now, Dom. So what was the catalyst in your decision making for the exit, given such an imperative or such values around culture and your people? We'd be interested just to know what made your decision come to fruition, and also if there was chances before that. Was there opportunities before that you declined?
So I don't think there was a single moment which was a catalyst. There was never a moment where I woke up and went, oh God, okay. What there was from very early on a plan of what we wanted to achieve with the business, and what we also saw our journey within the business being. So social media is a very a fast evolving industry. You know, you wake up every single day and something has changed, and that takes its toll on you a little bit. You have to be in it and you have to live it. So you do become heavily conditioned in a negative way, in my opinion. So from my side, I always wanted this business to be my university, my continued education after university of life. And for us, taking the business public was probably the place where we wanted to take it to. So when we achieved that, there was, in my mind, a period where it was what we set out to do was done. And to get the motivation, the drive to continue to optimize and scale probably wasn't there versus celebrating what you've done already. So for me, it became a moment where I realized that the time was right. It just felt right. There was no person or no one else involved. Steve and I spoke about it at length. We just felt it was right for what we've done and where we wanted to take it. So we spoke to the board in November 2019, pre-COVID, informed them of that kind of what we were thinking, that 2020 would be our last year. And however we wanted to play that, whether we transition out for the year or we do it, was up to them. We put it on their part. So those conversations began, and then in October, and obviously COVID happened. So when COVID happened, we set ourselves 5 key indicators that we needed to hit before we could even open the conversation. First being, are the people okay? That was the most important. Secondly was, are we on track for our target and revenues for the year? Secondly was obviously a question around cash. Fourth and fifth was around, the acquisitions we're making, are they going to still deliver? A4D, as Stuart mentioned earlier, was obviously one of those. So once we hit those indicators in June, when we completed the acquisition and when we realized that COVID actually led to a lot of positives in the business, we re-engaged that conversation. We had the conversation, and it was amicable, and the board said, look, we're ready for you to go. It's up to you. You guys can go now. We were happy to see at the end of the year, but that was the decision we made collectively.
Excellent, and great to get that little bit of insight into the personal choices and drivers. And I'm sure it wasn't an easy decision, but it felt right at the time. So talking about that process then, could you shed some light just on what that process was like? So from the point that the board decided, or you were in agreement, to now, what that looks like. And similarly, are you still involved with the business at all?
Yeah, God, how does that look like? So, I mean, I know, maybe in my head, I always pictured being able to stand and hug people and say thank you for everything. But we couldn't, that was the nature. That was everything. That's the worst thing. I've not seen people since then. I've not been able to say thank you face to face with people and look in their eyes and say, well, I appreciate everything you've done. So what we did was, we created a video for the team, and we played the video about saying thank you for everything. Really, touching moment for us. When we played that, and then our phones exploded because everyone was asking questions. So for the next 2 weeks, we were speaking to people about what's going on and everything, and had good conversations. And at that point, that was us announcing that we're going. We'd worked with the management team probably since the start of the year to get things in place. We had management structures across every business, across the US, across Germany, across the UK. So our responsibilities in the day-to-day were very little. We were focused much on financial growth plans, acquisitions, and other areas. So the impact of the day-to-day was minimum. And also with COVID really gave the team even more structure. I think you guys have probably seen that, but you speak to less people, but you speak to people you probably need to speak to now. So that also, gave the structure less impact. And then, August it was announced, and you don't exactly sail off to the sunset. You still feel there's still things that we're unpicking together, and then we're still sorting out. And the transition plan from an operational point of view was already kind of done, but from a kind of big picture stuff, there's still some things to untangle, which just the nature of being wedded for so long. We're still shareholders. We're not actively involved in the business anymore. That's fine. That was always kind of the plan. But we're still the biggest supporters. We want the business to be successful. I'm sending clients to Social Chain constantly. We're looking at acquisitions which could be fit for them. So for us, there's incentive from an equity point of view to make sure that they're successful.
Sounds good, thanks. Really interested to hear more about the main asset, the social media side. So I'll pass back to Stuart.
Yeah, no, and I think it's important to touch on this today, Dom, because having worked with entrepreneurs and people who run businesses for a few years, social media marketing is something that almost everyone is aware of. Everyone has some sort of account, but can find it really, really hard to see the value or the benefit of it. So quite interested to hear your views on, I suppose, how social media evolved for businesses. Is it as important as ever to have that effective social media channel? And if so, how does a business go about starting it and doing it effectively?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and there's no one answer. There's no one size fits all. My advice would be that the big wins and the real wins are made at the forefront. So, for example, right now, I would say to people, if you're looking at launching a business, really consider something like Pinterest. Pinterest as a search engine, as a performance media, is fantastic. It's outperforming everywhere at the moment. And that's because it's new, and that's because there's people learning. Instagram is vanity. People want vanity on Instagram. They want big numbers. That's not right. That's not going to get you anywhere, because I don't know anyone who's exploded an Instagram account from 0 to 1 million in the last 2-3 years. It's not going to happen, apart from an egg that cracks. So unless you're launching an egg product that's going to crack, there's no point focusing there. People get too caught up on looking at their competitors and being like, oh my God, I'm launching an athleisure business and Gymshark have 5 million on Instagram. I need to be there. The wins will come in the new spaces: TikTok, Pinterest, Clubhouse, which we spoke about earlier. This is where new wins happen. This is where new businesses are formed, not playing on existing media. So I'd really ask yourself what you're trying to achieve. And if you're trying to achieve a really successful business, you need to play in the new spaces. And then, you can move back to the old spaces afterwards. So yeah, that would be my advice. Social media is constantly evolving. It's always changing. You need to think about how your customer uses the platforms. Instagram, Facebook are just a fantastic places for paid performance to do ads. You get a good ads. You know, I know people who have got 0 Facebook followers but are driving thousands and thousands of pounds of revenue through Facebook every single day, despite having a Facebook page. You know, so you need to really understand the platforms and what you're going to use them for, and having a real defined channel strategy. And don't get caught up in vanity metrics and trying to waste time in competing in spaces where you probably can't compete because other people have total dominance.
No, that's perfect. I've actually wrote down a few of the names there for when the next business asks me what they should be doing. And I suppose you took brands from right the way through their journey. So I'm assuming that had an aspect of storytelling. So is that something which social media is important to get your brand out, your culture out? Is that something which you focused on for companies?
Yeah, and the storytelling part became so important. When I first started in Edinburgh, sat in my room, and this is going to sound really crazy to people to think back like how long ago this was, but you couldn't post an image on Twitter. You couldn't post an image. Everything was text-based. So think about that for a minute, okay? We've gone in the space of 6-7 years from just being able to post a picture to now AR, rich media, filters, turning them things into an entire creator suite. So the role of socials changed. You know, when people first got on Twitter, it was customer service. Someone tweeted them, an airline, oh, sorry, your plane was delayed, we'll give you a £20 refund. So being like, okay, well, we can create really powerful brand assets and visual stories on our social media platforms. So of course, when the capability there increases, and it's a channel they own versus TV, of course they're going to put emphasis on it because they control it and it's free for them to use apart from the content costs. So that became more and more important as platforms developed better, rich media. And in the last 4 or 5 years, well, definitely the last 2-3 years, video and storytelling has become what's become most important. But also on that piece, thinking social first, you started to see TV ads become social more in terms of the stories they tell and less about price, product. You know, the Christmas ads this year with the likes of Disney and McDonald's, they're emotional stories now. So people, I always say with social media, you're not competing against your competitor on Facebook. You're actually competing against Netflix in a lot of ways. You're competing against Spotify. You're competing against podcasts because you're a media publisher. You create media. You need to grab people's attention. So how can you grab attention without producing really rich visual content?
No, excellent tips there and advice. And I suppose this is going to sound like a weird question, having just heard that, but it's linking into the next section, which talking around mental health. But has social media been a positive or negative thing in the world and for business?
For business, positive. Not for some businesses, but it's democratized business a little bit. Everyone now can start a company. So you've seen businesses pop up in people's bedrooms because they can now start drop shipping and selling ads on Facebook. So I've met some really good people, very young, who've managed to start businesses that wouldn't have been able to exist in an older world. So it has democratized that a little bit. And anyone now can start an agency. They can now create content. So I think it's made a fantastic product for leveling out the playing field. From a personal point of view, I'm very thankful that social media exists right now, because how else would I stay close to my friends in COVID times? So it has some fantastic traits, but it also has some kind of really negative aspects. I think after this COVID thing, we all need to declimatize a little bit to our phones and to the internet. I'm tired of looking at screens a little bit. I'm sure most people are. And I would probably say there might be a little bit of retraction towards these things. You know, we're seeing record Netflix shows at the moment. We're not going to see that in a year's time. People aren't going to be sat there on a Friday night waiting for Bridgerton to come out. They're going to be wanting to see people, be around people, go experience things. So I would say in the next couple of years, I hope people put their phones away, put their social media away, and connect.
Yes, I'll join you with that. Looking forward to seeing people again in face to face. And on the mental health piece, Dominic, a few people I'm sure on the call follow you and I know you're very open about this. And I suppose keen to ask you, how important is mental health, and do you mind sharing a bit of your journey and why it is so important to you and for people in business?
Yeah, and I think for me, mental health, and I kind of bundle my health in together. So I talk about mental health as well as I talk about physical health, you know. So for me, it is, it's still a complete challenge to balance, and I'm not perfect and I've not got the best mental health, but I just make it really important. A bit about my kind of story. So from a personal point of view, I talked a lot about celebrating we did at Social Chain. And for me, when I was talking about those kind of periods where cash flow was becoming a crunch, how can I celebrate when I know that's in the back of my mind? How can I celebrate those moments of winning clients when I'm thinking, oh my God, that we're going to lose this client? You know, if we're not going to do the work, you know, we're not the best at that at the moment. So I kind of ended up using alcohol as a bit of a escapism, and would constantly drink to kind of forget things. And that would start on a Friday and it would end on a Monday. You know, it'd be very, very transparent. And I'd come back on Monday, you know, still recovering. And I was going through a very difficult period of my life. And I was kind of really internalizing the issues and not speaking about it. So yeah, I became very dependent on alcohol, and ended up going to hitting rock bottom, you know, having a couple of nights out where I've, you know, I say I'm not drinking again, and I did it, then I went again, and I ended up, you know, upsetting and hurting people I cared about, and that's not me. I'm not my friends. I value my friends so much. I will never want to see them upset, and I was upsetting them by my actions. So I knew I needed to make a change. I knew I needed to do something. So I went to go see a therapist, and the conclusion was that I was struggling with a couple of mental health issues. I was having anxiety, you know, borderline depression, imposter syndrome, and the alcohol was my escape. So the process of elimination was, if I get rid of alcohol, I can then work on my mental health and well-being, and that's what I had to do. So I had to. I knew that I couldn't get well without stopping drinking, so I stopped drinking, and that gave me the clarity and the ability to tackle the other issues in my life. And you know, that process probably took me 6 months of giving up alcohol to becoming, you know, myself again. And then since that day on, I've not drank. It's been 4.5 years now. Sobriety, my sobriety is the thing I'm most proud about over everything. But it's still a challenge, you know. In these days when we've been locked in, I've been like, oh mate, you know, what's the point? You know, I used to do it for Social Chain, now I should just drink again. So it's a constant battle, but I know that if I keep alcohol out of my system, I can focus on my mental health and make sure that I can manage myself. So I learned a lot of coping mechanisms of how to deal with myself when I was feeling like I was going into an anxious period, or when I felt like I was, you know, a little bit, you know, down and depressed. I knew what I could do to get myself up. And I've just learned over the last 4.5 years a lot about myself and how I react to situations and what I need to do with myself to keep myself well.
No, thank you for sharing that and being so open. It's a lot of the things, anxiety, frustration, obviously with COVID at the moment, it's something a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs will be going through. So it's good to know people like you talk open about it. And that therapy session was something I know you got a lot out of and really helped. And you ended up making, was it a quarterly opt-out therapy session in Social Chain? So how was that, and what was the uptake of like that in the organisation?
Yeah, and you know, as I said before, I really do quote that saved my life. I don't think I definitely wouldn't be in Social Chain if I kept on drinking. I don't know where I'd be, and that does inspire me to continue it. So you know, it was a transformational impact in me. You know, really visual transformational impact in me as a person. So when other people came to us in the business, and I said to Paula earlier, we just made these things a priority. So if someone came to us and said they were struggling, you know, we'd be like, oh, we're going to see a therapist. You know, we'll pay for it. And we ended up having about maybe 25 to 30% of the business seeing a therapist at some point, you know, for one thing or another. And what we kind of realized is that, you know, as the kind of process went on, the impact it was having, a lot of people didn't want to go see a therapist because of the stigma attached to it. So we just continued to be very open about it. The management team, myself, were very open about it. And I think it's very similar to having a coach or having a PT, for example. It's very it's your mental, it's your biggest, one of your most important muscles. Is it a muscle organ? Most important organ in your brain, your body, your brain. You need to exercise it. You need to figure out what's going on in there. So we just had to let everyone, look, we're going to make it completely anonymous. We'll never know if you don't go or do go. That's with the therapist. We're not going to find out that, but we just want to be able to offer it to you if you want to go as an opt-out session. If you don't want to go, absolutely fine. But you know, we're all, you know, management team are all going to go. Everyone's going to go. These are the advantages we've seen so far. Feel free. And we never enforced it on anyone. It was never like that, but it was just kind of making sure everyone knew that resource was there for them if they ever needed it or wanted it.
Yeah, so my next question is going to be, how do you have that sort of meaningful and honest conversation around mental health? But it sounds very much like you had to do it in a delicate way so people didn't feel that stigma, perhaps. But was there anything else you did to encourage people? Like, I'm assuming you shared your journey with.
Yeah, I shared my journey. You know, it took me about a year to be able to talk about it in more detail. But I always say to businesses, you know, businesses ask how they can have a better culture on mental health. I said I would get the most senior person who's had a mental health issue and get them to tell their story, because it has to come from the top down. It has to be acceptable in every single level of the company to be able to have a real program and make that person the internal mental health ambassador or whatever you want to call it, and let them be in charge of this process. HR, who may not know it very well, you know, they probably know the HR processes they can go through, but they don't really understand, can't relate to people and what they're going to be able to do about it. I think it has to be driven by leaders who have been through the situation, who can open and remove that stigma by saying, I've done it, I do it, you know. And thankfully, you know, being the founder, that was the top, wasn't it? You know, there was no one above us to be able to say it. And it just created a really open playing field where I would have people message me all the time about things they're going through. They would find me and Kira very acceptable. Kira opened up about hers. You know, she was the kind of person everyone went to. If Kira's opened up and Dom's opened up, and I might be able to talk. I can talk to them because they'll understand. And I think there's a wider thing to be said there about showing your vulnerability. I think if we all show our vulnerability, we are becoming much more approachable. So that's what we just did. I was very open on my social channels, on my every time I spoke to someone, I was just very open and honest about it. And I hope that created a positive impact on the business, and I hope that's what inspired people.
No, absolutely, and I think you're right. It needs to be talked about more, and shouldn't be something people should be embarrassed or shy of. So it's so great to hear that you had that approach. And in talking about I see online that you're an advocate of pushing positive stories. So there's always a lot of negativity in the media and bad news stories. But is that something we should all be doing more of in society, talking about the positive things to help us get through?
Yeah, I think positive and also real. I think people appreciate authenticity at the moment and reality of situations. So I won't be on Instagram posting a quote about how good my life is if I'm sat at home in Manchester watching Liverpool lose in football. I'll be posting something negative. So I think making it acceptable to talk about the truth is probably the place to be. But also when it comes to positivity, you know, we need to be championing good things that happen across everything. You know, little wins, little wins, little successes that we can use to say well done to people. So I would say, yeah, more positivity. You know, I'm sick of hearing the BBC news at the moment. What that sound is, it triggers my anxiety ridiculously. My advice to the BBC would be to change that in the future. But yeah, sharing more positive, uplifting stories, but also real stories. I think that's important.
No, perfect. Now we're going to go into questions from the audience, and I do see there are quite a few, and they will be quick fire when we get into them. So again, if you're sitting there with any questions, please just put it in, and Kristen will bring them to light in a minute. But sort of rounding off the formal interview, Dominic, it's been fantastic to hear that journey. It's all happened so quick and at a young age. I think it's only 28 still, is it?
27. I'm 27.
27, even younger.
Yeah, I forget.
I know, we'll forget.
Yeah, I'm 27. I'm 27. Yeah.
The last year, anyway. Who knows? What's next? What you've exited Social Chain now. What's next? What are you looking to do moving forward?
Yeah, really good question. For me, I need, as I said before, I'm declimatizing at the moment. I've probably not done what I wanted to do after I exited, given the nature of the world. So I've ended up throwing myself into a couple of projects which I'm enjoying. I'm doing a bit of advisory work for a VC, which is investing in some companies. I'm doing some own personal investments. So yeah, I think what is next in the big picture is I probably need to create that void and that creativity and that mission that I want to go against, and try and solve a world problem. I think that's probably where I end up going. And doing something meaningful and impactful. Not that Social Chain was a fantastic business, but after kind of year 6, what are you doing it for? You know, you're doing it for profit. Is that going to inspire me? Probably not. I need something which is going to really inspire me and, you know, take it back to the days when I was sleeping on the sofa and giving everything to kind of get this off the ground. I need a mission which makes me feel like that every single day.
Brilliant. So something purpose driven, but we've not heard or seen the last of you. It looks like it's still great. Kristen, I see a lot of questions have been coming through, and these may be quite quick fire for Dom, but shall I let you fire some questions away?
Yeah, perfect. That was a great interview, Dom. Very, very insightful, and it's sparked a lot of questions from the audience. So one question that's come in is, what are your favorite business books?
Yeah, good question. My favorite 2 books around this are Chimp Paradox, because I think it's the very most important to understand yourself before you try to understand other people in business. And then Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think living by those principles makes you go a long way.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, both very, very good books there. I'm sure a lot of the audience on the call will have heard or have read them. Another question is, what brands are leading the way in social media at the moment, in your opinion?
Well, I mentioned earlier, Gymshark. You know, they're what makes Gymshark so strong is they focus on the aspect of community. They're building communities. They're not trying to build social media accounts. They're trying to build communities, and that happens to have a knock-on effect. They're also playing in relatively new areas like TikTok as well. So they're the ones that I'd say, you know, if you want to look at a blueprint for how they think, not what they do, how they think, look at them.
Perfect. Another one that's come in, what is the best and the worst thing about having a co-founder?
The best thing is you're never alone. You know, you've got someone who's gone through exactly what you're going through. And I don't think there is any negatives. Honestly, I don't think there's any negatives, especially in our relationship. There was never, you know, he's a Man United fan, I'm a Liverpool fan, so that's probably the worst thing. We fight over that, but apart from that, nothing.
No, that's great. It's great to know you had that relationship as well. I'm sure finding a co-founder is difficult, so it's great that you found one that you were such great friends with. What was your original vision for yourself and for the business, and how did that end up differing from the reality?
So my original vision for myself was I was going to go to University Edinburgh, play football, you know, hopefully get into the Scottish second division or something, like some of our friends did, and, you know, make it as a footballer. That didn't happen. So my kind of personal vision on who I wanted to be as a person was I always wanted to be someone who helped others. So that as a kind of business went forward, that kind of what morphed it. The original vision for the business was, as I said before, we connected a chain of pages together and we'd own social media, and people would come to us a bit like a tech platform, and they'd be like, I want to reach 18 to 34-year-olds, click a button, and then it would be dispersed on our social media pages. So we wanted to go down a tech route, but we realized that there was so much needed to do in education in the space that you couldn't do that via tech. You have to do that face to face and talk to people about why social media is going to be important. That's why we came on the consultative approach and ultimately formed an agency.
Perfect, that's great. Yeah, such a difference from where you saw yourself and where you ended up.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that's the same for a lot of entrepreneurs, especially in COVID, having to pivot and change. So it's great to hear that you've been through that. Another question that's come in is, what does success mean to you?
Oh God. Success for me is like seeing other people develop and grow. You know, I don't take any benefits from me being a better, you know, having more money or anything like that. Success for me is, you know, being able to impact and help other people.
Great. No, that's nice. Good to hear. And how did your work life affect your personal life? And have you got any tips to cope? I know you kind of touched a little bit on that, but any specific tips or insight into that?
Yeah, I think, you know, there was no personal life in the early days. There was no personal life. You know, we were sleeping on sofas. I didn't see many of my friends for a long period of time. I kind of just focused on the business. So it definitely impacted it and made it negative. I lost, you know, a lot of people lost a lot of friends for a period of time. So yeah, it impacted it. And that's kind of, you know, is that what it took to get the business successful? I don't know. But, you know, we were so inspired and focused on what we were trying to do that that was our life. And that's what we wanted to do. It's what we enjoyed doing every single day. As we got older, we kind of started to be able to remove responsibility a little bit and have more of a personal life. So the impact in the early days is so much different to the later days. I think in the later days, you get the balance right and you become the ability to control what you do and when you do it. In the early days, you know, you've got to get a rocket to the moon, basically. So the fuel it takes in the early days is much more than it takes once it's gliding.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. And how much does your gut feeling play in the strategy of your business, and how much does your gut influence the way that the business strategy is implemented?
So I think gut feelings when it comes to people is very powerful. When it comes to making a choice over the right people, I think when it comes to business and making strategic decisions, you need to do line that gut with data and insights. But I think with people, it's probably the one place where it's always correct.
Perfect. And another one that's come in is, what makes you angry? And also on the converse of that, what brings you joy?
So I talk about this thing called a mono mood, where I'm always one mood. Nothing gets me angry, nothing gets me excited. And I think that's kind of something I've learned over a period of time, is that you can never really embrace the highs and without having lows, and you can never have lows without having highs. So I kind of created a flat structure where nothing really bothers me, nothing really impacts me. And it's quite sad because I don't really get excited for anything, even when we went public or when I exited, it was just kind of the same feeling. But it definitely helps you manage situations, and having complete control of your emotions is really powerful.
Perfect, thank you. Another one that's come in, and I know you've touched on your team kind of as we've been going through the interview, and your 15th hire and stuff like that. But in terms of the early days, who were your first key hires and what were their roles? And in hindsight, would you change anything about the first few roles that you hired?
So essentially, what we were in the early days was collective, and I think collectives are getting very powerful at the moment, especially in marketing. So we were a collective of as I said, 5 or 6 people who were just doing things they enjoyed. So we had a really strong nucleus. So the first kind of employee I said we'd hire would probably be like 7th, 8th, or 9th. So we already had this really strong nucleus of people who were with us doing on a mission. So kind of by then we kind of started to look at skills we needed. So we needed a designer. So we brought in a designer. We needed someone who could manage influencers. But what we found more and more is that because the nucleus of people there was so strong, we had quite a big nucleus, relatively big. These are all people we call co-founders and partners, beyond Steve and I, is that they would then either come into the nucleus and not feel it's like a job, it would feel like a family. So I wouldn't change anything in that aspect, but what we did really well was everyone from the early days was very, very bought into what they were trying to achieve. They had equity in the business, they felt like it was theirs, and they were running it as they owned it.
Perfect, thank you. That's really great insight. Another question that's come in is around mentor relationships, and how do you cultivate those mentor relationships, make them really genuine, but extracting mentorship from a friendship, because quite often friendships are what starts out and mentorship maybe follows. So do you have any tips or advice on how to cultivate mentor relationships?
I think with mentors, it's probably easier to be someone you have no relationship with, who's the relationship strictly professional. I think you could end up fogging up a friendship. I would say what I did is I spoke to our accountant, who said, do you know anyone who's interested in becoming a mentor or does mentoring? He put me in touch with 2 people. I met one of them. We clicked. It was okay. He just listened to me really. So I would say someone needs to want to mentor. That's probably the most important thing, is that they need to be in a place where they can mentor. And it probably needs to be someone who you've got no relationship with. That's what I think. They'll tell you honest. They won't dance around the subject. They'll just tell you facts.
Yeah, no, that's great insight. And another one that's coming around mentorship is, do you mentor anyone at the moment?
Formally, no. Informally, yes. I take calls with people and I'll point them in directions. But I'm open to conversations with people, but I don't do anything formally.
No, that's great. And here's another one, maybe get your brain going. Would you do it again? Start a business from the get-go and build it up to multi-million, or
that's the interesting thing. I know what it takes now. I know what it takes to get there. So imagine running a marathon and being out of breath the whole time and being like, okay, next time I'm going to go for the world record. You know what it takes. So you've got to be in the right place to do it. Am I there yet? No. Will I get there in the future? Probably. So at the moment, it's when I say I'm going to do something, it's going to be, I know what it's going to take. I know I'm going to get there. So I'll have to be in the right place to do it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, especially when you've just been through it, and maybe now is a little bit of time for you to relax before you embark on your next journey.
Yeah.
Another one that's come in is, what has gave you the most pleasure from running a business, and is there anything that you don't miss?
So the most pleasure has been people. There's fantastic stories in the business of how people joined at 17 and now gone on to become head of video at 22, and seeing people grow. That's always been the most rewarding thing. Yeah, there's a lot of things I do miss about it. Things I don't miss is, probably to that again, people. There's some things with people you don't miss. So it's also the reward, and it's also the thing you've got to stomach.
Yeah, no, that's great. Is there any businesses that you admire at the moment, and why is it that you admire them?
Yeah, very good question. I kind of I admire the businesses who are taking risks. I think people that are looking at future-facing problems and trying to solve those bigger questions are the businesses which I really admire. Revolut in the fintech space, what they're trying to do there. Sorry for that. But I think businesses who are taking on the big problems are the ones that I really admire.
No, that's great to know. And a question that's come in is, we like to ask this to all entrepreneurs, and everyone's always keen to know the answer. What would you advise yourself if you could give advice to your 17-year-old self?
You'll be all right. Just carry on. I don't know. I always find that question so weird. Like, like people ask me about drinking. Do I regret drinking? No, I am happy. I was an alcoholic. It really, that sounds so bizarre to say, but I'm happy I went through that. I won't go through it again. I'm not going to drink again, but I won't go through it again. But I'm so grateful I went through that period because it defined me and made me who I am. So I wouldn't change anything.
Okay, no, that's great. A great answer. And touching on things that you mentioned before about the brands that kind of came to you, Pretty Little Thing and Spotify, they approached you. But for the small businesses and for the startups who are on this call, we had a question just asking, do you have any advice for small companies who are trying to approach the larger brands? Any strategy or any tips that you could give advice on how to actually target these larger brands?
Yeah, I think my biggest advice there is find a way for them to speak to you. It's so much easier if they come to you than you go to them. You're going to appear from a value proposition a lot less valuable. So think about how you can be creative in your marketing. Think about how you could get to someone personally and get them interested in you. I was speaking to a founder yesterday who posted a couple of posts on LinkedIn, and he got 2 angel investors coming to him, and they were both fighting out to put seed funding into him because of one post on LinkedIn, because of the way he wrote it. So my advice is always find a way for people to come to you.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And do you feel that Social Chain's brand and your own personal brand are still interconnected to this day? And in what way do you think that this is?
So I think Social Chain is a fantastic brand. We stood for so much, and what you saw in Social Chain was our personalities. The things that Social Chain didn't talk about was Steve and I. So of course there's going to be a hangover and relationship with the two of them. So maybe it's my journey now to focus on myself and develop my own personal brand a little bit more. Maybe make some moves into some different areas. But I know for a fact I'm so young, it's not going to define me. But Social Chain was a great business. It was a great brand. We did some great things. So I'm proud that I am associated with it.
No, that's great. And yeah, I could vouch for that. It's good to know that you still got that connection and you still enjoy the connotations that come from it. What does well-being mean to you, Dom?
God, yeah. Well-being means that well-being, self-care just means trying to understand yourself and put yourself first in situations when you need to. It means if you do want to have that slice of pizza, have it. Don't punish yourself, especially right now. I think it's very important to try and manage our well-beings in as many ways as possible. And for me, it's like I will do what I need to do to get by and keep happy. That might be a half an hour Peloton class, but it might be, I'm going to have a Chinese night. So it just means about, understanding yourself and knowing what you can and can't be doing and shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, no, that's great. Another one kind of interlinked with yourself and Social Chain. Do you think that as the company progressed, its core values were altered in any way? And how have your own personal values transformed as a result of building Social Chain and then exiting?
I think Social Chain, when we started, I think that's one of the most powerful things about being small is that you can do much more for people, and you can have a much more meaningful business at a smaller scale to each person. And as you grow, you have to kind of go through that process of defining what the values are, and you have to probably write them and tell people rather than people just living them. So when we went on the process of defining our values and talking about them, I think we settled on first, fearless and ever changing. There's kind of, and family has been kind of the third. And we then tried to make sure everyone lived them. And I think it becomes more difficult when you've got more people. So everyone interprets it differently. So I think they don't necessarily change, but they evolve and everyone interprets them differently. For my personal side of things, yeah, I think I definitely did grow probably as fast faster than the business in myself. Everything kind of in the early days was done intrinsically for myself. And by the end of the business, it was very much externally focused. So that shift on what was important to me and how I changed was really important in helping me grow and helping the business grow.
Thank you. So how did you include diversity and inclusion in your organisation? As you mentioned, people were your main focus, and your cultural value was to care about them. However, on the flip side, you also mentioned that when you're hiring people, you use your gut. So how did you ensure that you had that diversity and inclusion within Social Chain?
Yeah, I think we benefit from having a lot of young people. So therefore, young people tend to be more diverse and open. But this is, I hope this comes across the right way, but no one ever cared about who anyone was. We didn't care if people were straight. We didn't care if people were gay, bi, anything. What their ethnicity was. No one ever cared. We just wanted to make sure we had the best and the right people in the business. And I think at one point we had 25% LGBT in the business. We had a community called Gay Chain, which everyone everyone in that community was involved with. We have obviously quite a diverse board in terms of Steve's background and other founders being of different ethnicities. We had female managing director. So we never had to create a quota. We never had to. It just happened, and from that, it was taking every single person at their face value and what they could deliver. And we never had to make sure that we had quotas in any place. It just happened but naturally, and I think I'm thankful for that because we just had great people in the right places.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and I think that's the way forward, and hopefully the future. Whereas you don't look at these ethnic minorities or gender. It just happens, and you hire good people, and you hire a diverse.
Yeah, and I think the big thing there was we were young people. We weren't a new age, and young people. We're not stuck in traditions of having all white men in places. It just happened because young people came together. So that was probably our biggest driver.
Great, thank you. And is there any one decision that you are most proud of?
Decision I'm most proud of.
Either in the business.
Yeah. I think one decision which made me cry was when we rebranded the logo to the L shape. That rebrand and that going through that values process was a decision where I was like, that was a very defining moment for the business. Taking that rebrand, and I said to Paula, going for that period where you transition from what the clients want to what you want to be. That for me was the decisions we made around then. There's probably 2 or 3 key ones, including the logo, including the values, including what we wanted to our strapline to be, which was the defining moment for the business.
No, that's great. And is there any areas that you would be looking to in the future or currently where you think are great areas for investment, and that they're going to be businesses of the future and really areas where investment will be key?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think asking yourself what are the problems of the future going to be as a global economy, what are our problems going to be? It's going to be health. So it's going to be like, how can people maintain health? So you look at some biotech companies there which are trying to prolong life. Secondly, it's probably green energy. How can we maintain green energy in place of that? So that becomes paramount. And then you have also trying to think what else is on that list, but those areas which are solving world problems are super important.
No, that's good to know, and great for our entrepreneurs as well. Another one that's come in is, do you ever log off from work? I know you mentioned in the early days there was very little of that. You were sleeping in the office, etc. But did you learn to log off from work? And what was the point where you realized you had to separate that work and life balance?
Yeah, for me it came a lot with the drinking point of things. I knew that like WhatsApp notifications were giving me anxiety, so I turned my WhatsApp notifications off, and I'd make sure I get to sleep and turn my phone off at night. So for me, it was a gradual process from when I probably got burnout and probably imploded, I guess is the term, that I knew I needed to make these changes. So from then on, it's been a gradual process of having better balance. So now, fortunately, I'm winding down at 7 o'clock in the evenings now. It used to be 10, but it got better. as I kind of put things in place and people in place to assure it.
Perfect, that's great. So we've just got a couple more questions and then we'll round it up. But one question that's come in is, how did you learn to lead from, starting off on your own in your bedroom in Edinburgh to then, growing this huge business, and you're now the leader. How did you learn to lead?
Yeah, so at first I was a terrible leader. I was very bad. I tried to be everyone's mate and be liked, which led me to going to drinks and being in the pub with people. And again, stopping drinking gave me that separation. I realized that these, people, friendship and being liked is not the answer to being a good leader. It's being respected. So you have to earn respect through your actions rather than be given it. So I then, through that period, learned that I needed to make my actions not the one that I want people to hear or what people want to hear, but respectable. So I felt, I never sat there and like, I need to get everyone's respect, but I just started acting in a way after giving up drinking that I thought would be the right way. That was a real intervention for me. It was just like I know I've gone on about it, but the drinking piece was really intervention for me, and a really pivotal point in my life where I kind of said, okay, I need to grow up now.
Yeah, no, that's good. Good to know, and that you kind of built that as you went along. You weren't a natural leader. You built on your skills, and that will give a lot of the audience who are listening today some hope and some encouragement to carry on. Another one that's kind of touching on something you mentioned before when Stuart asked you about, positive or negative effect of social media. Do you think that social media paints an unrealistic picture for young people or what work is and what a career is based on what they see influencers doing on social media rather than the conventional way of work?
Yes and no. I think it's 70% of young people want to be influencers these days. So when you break down what skills or what talents influencers have, is that they're actually, some of them are creators. So they do creative things. So I know people who have gone into graphic design, who have gone into shoes, and when we look at what the careers of the future are going to be like, creativity is going to be very important, creative thinking. So I think people who are wanting to be creative and work in these areas are probably going to have skill sets which are fit for the future. I think it's something like 50% of jobs that are going to be around in 20 years don't exist at the moment. So how can we teach young people what they're going to do? We can't. We have to teach them a mindset and a soft toolkit of how to approach the future. So I think hopefully that will help in giving people a creative spark. But I also think there are negatives in terms of that life is not realistic. Not everyone's going to become an influencer. Also, not everyone's going to become an entrepreneur. So there needs to be same way that young people wanted to be footballers 20 years ago, and a lot of them didn't make it and turned to alcohol and probably had quite a sad life afterwards. There needs to be better infrastructure around helping people navigate and reskill, because in 30 years, I think we're all going to need to reskill into something because the economy is going to look so different. So there's going to be this process of reskilling. There's going to be this process of people failing. And we need to make sure that we've got the infrastructure in place to support that.
No, that's great, and great to hear insight from both sides, both the positive and the negatives of social media, especially for the future and going forwards. We've just got one last question before we wrap up the session, and I'll pass you back over to Stuart. But did you set out to exit? And if you didn't, at what point along the journey did exit become a viable option for you? And how did you kind of prepare yourself and the business to get to that point for exit?
Yeah, so exit was always a plan. Social media, I don't want to be running a social media business when I'm 30. It sounds crazy, but I don't want to be. There's bigger things to go after in the world. So we always saw it as a young person's game, and we knew that it'd have a lifespan for us. So that was always the plan. How I prepared myself for it, when we first said we were going to do it, and it was time, I honestly felt every emotion. I was, by the time we exited, it'd been like 6 months since we made the decision. So like, you can imagine that period, I felt everything, every single feeling, guilt, remorse, happiness, sad, every single feeling. All of a sudden, it was like a bloody bingo game. So you prepare yourself just by that length of time going through it and, just processing it. To the point when it comes, it just feels like you're already there, you're mentally gone. So that was, that was easier for me to navigate, because it kind of like a plane coming down, you just constantly getting to a point where you're ready to land. The business, again, as I said, we were probably almost there in November when we first had those conversations, but when it came to COVID, obviously that kind of completely derailed it. I think most people are probably seeing that post-COVID businesses look completely different. So regardless of whatever happened before, it was all about 2020. So we had to make sure that those indicators we set out were on track, and that 2020 was going to be the year that we needed it to be. And once we knew that was going to be the case, then for us, the job had been done. It was almost like two businesses. You know, we had a business up until February 2020, and then after 2020, we had a different business. Probably same for most people. So yeah, that was the business. The business was probably ready in November, but with COVID, it completely changed things. So that was a case of just getting management team in place. You know, making yourself redundant almost as a founder, making your responsibility limited, and having good people in places that you used to operate. That was the key.
Perfect. No, that's great. Really great insight, especially into your personal feelings on that journey. As I'm sure there'll be a lot of entrepreneurs on this call who exit might be their end goal in the future. So it's great. It's great to hear some insight from you, and hopefully you know what's to come.
Yes, add on that point, like exit's not also the answer. You know, I think you've got to really appreciate what the business does for you as a person and how defined you are. I would say that like I have seen negative impacts of people that want exiting their business because it gives them so much purpose. So you really need to think from yourself whether it's what you want to do.
No, thanks for that, Dom. That's really great advice, and thanks so much for answering all those questions so candidly from the audience. And I think we managed to get through a lot of them, so that's really great. But I'll pass back over to Stuart and Paula now just to wrap up the call.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. Lots of questions there. Quick fire for yourself, Dom, but great to get
mastermind.
Sorry?
Like mastermind.
Yeah, well, you didn't pass on any, so you did very well. So no, I suppose it is time to wrap up. But first, I want to thank yourself, Dom, for sharing those insights. As I mentioned at the start, I have watched from afar on LinkedIn and had seen the journey, but didn't appreciate a lot of the detail which we managed to get in today, which is a fantastic story, and the honesty is what we're looking for to help entrepreneurs and people who are maybe thinking of setting up a business to learn. So really, on behalf of all the team, Paula, Kristen, and the wider MAG team, want to say thank you for taking the time out to share that with us today. So yeah, and look forward to seeing what's next. To be honest, it sounds like it's definitely there's going to be more journeys to come.
Yeah, and completely. I think the future is an exciting place, but for the present, it's just still, as I said, recalibrating, enjoying time with my dog. And you know, while the world's in a little bit of chaos, it's quite nice to be the one in calm. So that's where I am for the immediate future.
Well, enjoy it. As I say, like many entrepreneurs, I'm sure you deserve a good rest after the last several years running the business.
As I said before, if anyone wants to drop me a message, you know, connect me with me on LinkedIn, on Twitter. You know, fortunately, I've got quite a lot of time on my hands, so I'm happy to pick up conversations with people. So yeah, thank you, really appreciate having me today, and yeah, looking forward to speaking to people who've watched it.
Brilliant, Dominic. If we could get the final slide up, please. As a reminder to everyone, we will be sending an email to all registered participants with some of the key takeaways, and we will be sharing a recording. So if you know anyone that you think would benefit from this session, please let them know, and we will share that recording so you can share that far and wide as well. For those that are staying on and would like to give feedback, there's a QR code and a link there. This is feedback to let us know how you felt the session was, because we do a series of an audience with sessions. If you felt the session was positive, we'd ask you to rate it 8 and above. If you thought it was okay and you didn't mind it, a 6 to 7. And if you thought you wouldn't recommend below a 6, what we would say is, in all cases, please let us know a bit of feedback. I was aware there's a bit of an issue with people signing on initially with a certain link. If you could ignore that one in terms of the feedback, we're looking for the content, I suppose, of the session. As a reminder to those on as well, we do have an event tomorrow as well. It is on investment, and it's getting past the gatekeeper. That is on tomorrow, and it's 11 o'clock. Again, if you look on the various bank pages, the links will be on there to sign up. So all that's left for me to do is say thank you everyone for joining and taking an hour and a half out of your day. I'm sure you got a lot out of it. I certainly learned a lot, and I've worked with entrepreneurs for several years, so really enjoyed the session. We will leave this slide on for the next few minutes for people who want to give the feedback, but for everyone else, feel free to drop off, and thank you very much for joining.